Have you ever heard of the term bystander effect, where people fail to intervene in an emergency situation, assuming that someone else will take charge and intervene? That is the basis of today's episode, where a young woman lost her life because eyewitnesses assumed that someone else would reach out and call for help, but no one ever did. By the time help would come, it was already too late. Genovese was just an ordinary woman living an ordinary life in Queens, New York City. Born in Brooklyn on July 7, 1935, Kitty grew up with her four siblings and loving parents in a modest home. Her father worked as a bartender while her mother was a homemaker. The family was very close-knit, and Kitty was particularly close to her older brother Vincent, who served in the army during World War II. Kitty was a hardworking and ambitious woman, and after completing high school, she began working as a barmaid. She eventually moved on to work as a manager at a bar in Queens, where she was very well liked by both her co-workers and customers. She was also openly gay, which was not widely accepted at the time, but Kitty never let that stop her from living her life to the fullest. However, tragedy struck on March 13, 1964, when Kitty was brutally murdered outside her apartment building by Winston Mosley, a 29-year-old man with a troubled past. Mosley, a married father of two, had a history of burglary and assault against women and had recently been released from prison on parole. Mosley had a troubled and criminal past. He was born on February 2, 1935 in Harlem, New York City. Mosley grew up in a dysfunctional family and had a difficult childhood. He was the second youngest of 6 children, and his father was abusive towards him and his siblings. As a teenager, Mosley began committing burglaries and other crimes, and he eventually dropped out of high school. He also developed a fascination with sexual violence and assault, and he would later confess to committing over 30 burglaries and several sexual assaults before the murder of Kitty Genovese. Mosley's criminal activities eventually led to his first arrest, and he was sentenced to prison in 1954. He was released on parole in 1962, but was arrested again in 1963 for another burglary. There is no evidence to suggest that Mosley knew Kitty Genovese before the night he murdered her. It is believed he randomly targeted her as she was walking home from work in the early hours of the morning. On March 13, 1964, Mosley spotted Kitty as she was walking home from work in the early hours of the morning and decided to follow her. He eventually caught up to her in the parking lot of her apartment complex, where he attacked her with a knife. As he stabbed her, Genovese screamed. Her shouts for aid were loud enough to arouse her neighbors at 3:15 a.m. However, none of them rushed to her rescue. One man shouted, "Leave that girl alone!" It was enough to scare Mosley away, but even with him gone, nobody helped Kitty back to her feet. For 10 whole minutes, she crawled across the ground, slowly bleeding out, no one helping her. Mosley came back 10 minutes later to find Kitty still alive and crawling towards the entrance of her apartment building. He proceeded to stab her several more times before assaulting and robbing her, and then fled. Neighbors did not notify the police until 4 a.m. that morning, over 1 hour after she was assaulted. It was too late by then. Kitty had already passed away. A few witnesses said that they dialed 911, but that their calls were not prioritized. Others simply said that they presumed someone else would have done it instead. The behavior of Kitty's neighbors cost the young woman her life. After the murder, Mosley fled the scene and returned to his home in Queens, New York City. He later returned back to the scene of the crime and stole Kitty's keys, which he used to enter her apartment and steal some of her belongings. On the night of the murder, one of Kitty's neighbors, Carl Ross, had seen a suspicious car in the area, and he had taken down the license plate number. When police traced the license plate, they found that the car belonged to Mosley. When police arrived at Mosley's home, he initially denied any involvement in the murder. When police found some of Kitty's belongings in his possession, he eventually confessed to the crime. Mosley was charged with murder, robbery, and attempted rape, and he was eventually found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to death, but his sentence was later commuted to life in prison. It is worth noting that Mosley was also responsible for several other crimes, including the murder of 2 other women, and he was eventually linked to a total of 8 murders. Despite his crimes, Mosley continued to maintain his innocence and attempted to appeal his conviction several times. All of his appeals were unsuccessful, and he remained in prison until his death in 2016 at the age of 81. The murder of Kitty Genovese is often cited as an example of the bystander effect, where individuals fail to intervene in an emergency situation because they assume someone else will take action. In the case of Kitty, it was reported that at least 38 of her neighbors heard her cries for help but did nothing to assist her. The reasons for the bystander effect in Kitty's case are unclear, but it is believed that factors such as the lateness of the hour, the assumption that someone else would help, and the diffusion of responsibility among a large group of people may have played a role. Additionally, it was reported that some of the neighbors thought Kitty's screams were simply the sound of a lover's quarrel or a drunken argument and did not realize the seriousness of the situation. The murder of Kitty Genovese had a profound impact on society and led to increased awareness of the bystander effect and the importance of taking actions in emergency situations. If you ever suspect someone may be in trouble, please do the right thing and call the police. Until next time, humans, stay safe out there.